All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another stream where we talk about Quilibrium, the L1 protocol that we're developing, all the associated news around it, and also some developer updates. Just as a quick disclaimer, as always, the discussion today is not a solicitation for investment and is not financial advice. Quill and the wrapped Quill tokens discussed on this broadcast are utility tokens, and Quilibrium Inc. does not endorse or encourage speculation of the utility token of the network. With that aside, as always, we talk about the mission of Quilibrium. For those unfamiliar, the mission of Quilibrium is to secure every bit of traffic on the internet, whether it is on Quilibrium itself, in service of other crypto protocols, or in service of the broader web. Now, normally we do these on Sundays. Obviously, we had some interesting predicaments getting to that, and so we are here on what is a Tuesday evening for me, might be a Wednesday morning for some of y'all. Regardless, glad that I was able to get the Streamlabs issue sorted out. Had to go through like a upgrade, then a downgrade, then an upgrade again, and finally, hey, we're here. So with that out of the way, we're going to have a relatively short broadcast this time. We're just going to be going over a couple quick news updates that are important for folks who are interested in tracking the development, and then we're going to do a walkthrough of QConsole, which is something that we've been fielding out a little bit with individuals and slowly getting some feedback and building up on that. And then once we've reached a satisfactory point, we release it to everyone as a broader release. So to get started, we'll talk about some news updates. For those who use this to follow along for the news, this will be new to you. If not, this might sound a little bit like a repeat. But first and foremost, we got through QCL and consensus sidecar testing over the past week, and we are now in a good state to where we're able to set a date for 2.1 to be available on Mainnet. We are planning on doing the cut of the build roughly April 9th, and then that'll give essentially some time for folks to get upgraded, reconfigure their nodes to handle the relative setting changes that we're going to have. I'll dive into a bit of that in a sec, but targeting a cutover date for Mainnet at April 14th. That frame number has been announced. It's 244,200, I think. I think that's the frame. So 244,200. That's roughly April 14th at 12 a.m. UTC. The reason why we have such a long frame to go over before the update rolls out, like I said, there are some configuration changes, especially if you're running a cluster. The nature of 2.1 is a shard-based model. The workers are going to be maintaining their own shards. They're going to have their own stores, unless you choose to configure the master worker node being the primary store. So there's a few configuration settings that will need to be handled. There's also networking related settings that will especially be required to be handled. Where this comes into play is under how we've been doing things currently. Everything has been going over libp2p, and that has worked really well for the message passing layer. But as our testing has been going on testnet, we found that certain things that we've been using libp2p for, namely the streams feature, so that we can do streaming data over individual connections between peers, has some serious issues depending on the OS that it's running on. I've noticed this issue is less prominent on macOS, but is very apparent on Linux. And what seems to be happening, and we haven't figured out the reason why, is that it basically is causing it to kind of stutter as data is being sent over, and it's not a very reliable transport. So instead, we're going to be having a secondary port that node operators will need to expose. Like I said previously in other materials, we're going to be releasing a upgrade guide. So when this build is cut and people will be able to upgrade to it, we're going to have a detailed instruction set on what you need to do in order to change your node to work functionally with this. If you have a relatively standard build, like you basically just have been using one of the community scripts, or you've even been using the auto release script that we've had for a long time, it should be a pretty seamless upgrade. But if you do have a relatively bespoke system that's on a cluster, you're gonna want to pay attention to that upgrade guide. All right. Apologies today. I've had crazy allergies all day, so my eyes have just been watering like mad. All right. So Outside of that, a couple of other quick news items. Quite a few of you jumped on that super quickly. We have the Quorum mobile beta coming out this week. Very excited about that, and we got a form out there. Didn't realize that it had a limit, and so like it very quickly got smashed through the limit, which was cool to see. And so I had to raise up the limit to unlimited so people could actually continue to put their email address on that to be enrolled into the beta. When the beta is released, you will get an email about that with instructions on how to set that up on TestFlight, or if you're on Google through the Google Play beta, or if you're running just a regular Android phone, these were options that were on the forum. We'll just send you the APK directly and have a separate feedback channel for that. So with all that out of the way, we are now at the point where we can start walking through QConsole. So for those who have been very familiar with the development of Quilibrium, you'll know that the purpose of Quilibrium beyond the mission is to, like, our big, hairy, audacious goal is to essentially replace Amazon Web Services. And so part of that has been having to build out services that are compatible with AWS's offerings. And the way that we're targeting our initial offering set of services that we're compatible with is primarily Amazon S3 and Amazon Key Management Service. The reason we target those two is because they are very low-hanging fruit. They're very expensive to use on Amazon. They're very easy to fit into the Quilibrium network as native offerings. And so by consequence, it's one of the easiest go-to-market strategies and has the highest amount of potential immediate growth for our customer base. So I'll go ahead and go through demoing that, and if this ends up being super fast, then this ends up being super fast. If it doesn't, then we'll just take it as it goes. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this button. Hopefully it actually works. Like I said, Streamlabs has been super wonky. Cool, it didn't work. Fun. All right, let me adjust the screen capture real quick, and hopefully I can get that working. There we go. Okay. So, all right, QConsole is now up. So the basic idea of QConsole is that, like I said, very similar to Amazon Web Services, but there is one unique component to it that we find really cool, is the ability to share assets between different accounts. Obviously, with Amazon Web Services, you can do like the IAM account linking, and you can basically delegate downwards to a series of accounts. But in terms of cross-account sharing, there's a very limited surface area, and for good reason. But the reason ultimately in Amazon's perspective is that the people who are using AWS traditionally are going to be in a silo. Like, they put their projects on Amazon Web Services, they launch them, they expose them, and then the world uses them, and that company, whatever they're doing with that, just continues to carry on, and that's it. In the decentralized world, there's a lot of places where you would actually want to have composability between assets. We aren't able to demo that composability through the QStorage templates today. I was hoping to get that completely sealed and ready to go. So unfortunately, we didn't get that in time, but I'll at least demonstrate what QStorage and QKMS are like, so people have a good understanding of how to use these. If you use the Amazon S3 APIs, the only difference between using QConsole's QStorage and QKMS is that the endpoints change. So if you're familiar with using an API, access key and access secret key like you normally would construct for an AWS account, works pretty much the same. The values are different, but works pretty much the same. You configure it the same, you just change the endpoint. And so what I have right here is the dev build of QConsole, because I was tweaking stuff around the templates. Hopefully I stashed that and stashed everything around that in time, so this ends up being a full preview of how the S3 compatibility works. So we're going to go ahead and create a bucket. And in this example, I am literally going to demonstrate what it's like to deploy a website. So the way this works is you create a bucket, you name it whatever you want. It follows the same naming conventions and rules as Amazon Web Services. And we have a nice drag and drop interface for you to put your assets into if you want to go about it that way. I've got a window pulled up here. Let me drag it up here so you can see. It's literally just a drag and drop process. So like any web page that you're going to be bringing over, you just drag and drop and it uploads, and it's relatively quick. When you have it in the public bucket mode, which is what we're doing by default, it's a pretty easy thing to do. Like, you just literally drag and drop your assets over. I'm going to keep dragging stuff over, and then I'm going to drag the rest of this over as well. And then finally, what was the last thing I uploaded? Okay, cool. Then we're going to drag the rest of this. For those who have not seen the innards of the Quilibrium website, we've got a very simple and straightforward deployment process. It's a static page. But the cool thing about this is now that QConsole is available and the QStorage API is available, how we've been currently hosting it has been basically through GitHub pages. We can actually now move over and self-host on Quilibrium itself. So basically the files, like when you have a public bucket, it's very straightforward. You just literally point it at the given endpoint bucket name, and then you access that index path. Now, everything around this asset is based on like a relative path of it being at the root. So it doesn't actually load anything when we have this here because it doesn't know where to find it. You'll see a bunch of 404s, and you can see that the reason that there's 404s, if I pull this over a bit so my face isn't over it, you can see that it's trying to get it from the like path here. So what we do is the same thing you do with S3 APIs. When you create a bucket and you want to make it a website bucket, you can actually link it to a domain name. Like I said, some of this is not exposed at the moment because we've been tweaking some of the things to allow the template sharing feature. So unfortunately, I won't be able to show that, but the basic process is you set your DNS records up accordingly so that the CNAME is pointing to the bucket domain name. So very similar to S3, when you have like the raw bucket endpoint, you either do /bucket name, or you can do the domain name route where it's the subdomain dot in the ultimate case of where the QConsole APIs, etc. live, it'll be essentially bucket name dot qstorage dot quilibrium.com. And that's basically it. It's a very simple management interface. Like I said, we're going to be adding features continuously throughout, but as of right now, the API itself is actually 100% compatible with the Amazon S3 APIs. So if you just use the existing AWS tooling, you can do whatever type of configuration you want. It supports the ability to tag items, be able to do all sorts of esoteric configurations. If you want to have like a bunch of different policies that live at the bucket or live at the object level. If you want to apply the, this is probably more important for enterprise style customers, but if you want to enforce the object lock and legal hold policies that exist for S3, you can do that too. We support it outright. It's literally 100% compatible. We also support S3 Select. That's probably going to be the weirdest one that we have because it's a little bit complicated and there may be some edge cases there. So if somebody wants to test out the S3 Select APIs, by all means, we're very open to getting good feedback on that. And next up is QKMS. So QKMS, for those unfamiliar with Amazon's key management service, it allows you to create different key types, either for the purpose of encryption and decryption, signature verification, or producing machine authentication codes. Right now, I'm going to demonstrate a simple encryption case. We're going to use symmetric default, and that's going to use AES in order to encrypt data. So I'm going to say test AES key. And again, like always, you can provide tags in the same way that you do with AWS. And then when you create the key, you'll be able to go to it. And then you'll see the rotation history, which applies to symmetric keys. I think right now there's a bug where it shows up the rotation history on keys that can't be rotated. If that's true, we'll fix that. In the meantime, you put in plain text data. We're going to have a switcher, so you can do plain text or hex if you want to use this interface. But you'll be able to encrypt your data using that or using the APIs directly, and you end up with an output ciphertext. And we very simply provide that ciphertext immediately in a test decryption mode so you can decrypt that text, and you'll get, of course, hello world. And if you have something that is not correct, that is not decryptable, it will fail to decrypt, and you will essentially end up with no change. So that's basically it. You can schedule deletion. For those familiar, the deletion process, like you have a pending deletion, it'll show you the scheduled deletion time, and at that time it will actually delete the key material, or at least the key material that is the hash stored on the network itself. And of course you can cancel it and then re-enable it, and you can do any of those operations at any time. You can also rotate the key, so if you need to do key rotation, rotation is supported. The last thing I'm going to show is going to be actually a lot more relevant for people in the crypto sphere, which would be handling elliptic curve keys. So we're going to have a sample ECC key, and we'll go ahead and create that and pop into the view for that. For those unfamiliar with AWS KMS, one thing that is very important to understand is that the output data that comes from the APIs, specifically the AWS APIs, is in the format that is called DER. It is essentially the distinguished encoding representation. And what that means is it has a lot more bytes packed around the actual data that most people would care about. So in other words, if you are typically a wallet developer, like let's say you're building a crypto wallet, your familiarity with keys is almost always in the raw format, sometimes with a little bit of amendment around the V value of the ECDSA signature, but at the end of the day, it's in a raw format. So while the AWS compatible APIs are going to remain 100% compatible, so they will have DER encoding, the actual outputs include the raw format. So if you want to utilize the raw format for like interacting with crypto protocols, you can actually just get that directly. So we do offer both the raw output and the DER encoded output. And keep in mind, this is doing MPC, so the kind of like hand behind the wall that's doing some puppetry here is in this mode, I have it actually running the corresponding client-side MPC operation within QConsole itself. But as a configuration step, you actually can dictate where that lives and how that runs. So what we have here is a public key that we've generated. It's an elliptic curve key. We'll go ahead and drop in just some random, I guess not that random, but some hexadecimal, and then we'll go ahead and sign it. And it produces a output signature. Now note that this is a raw signature. So if you try to like copy the raw format, we actually need to put that, like switch this around. But if you copy the raw format and you try to verify it, it'll say signature verification failed. And that is specifically because the API is expecting it in the DER format. So if we go ahead and do that, then it verifies successfully. Similarly, if we have a modified message, it will fail all the same. So yeah, that's basically it. At the bottom, we do also have the raw KMS API calls. So if you would prefer to use the AWS CLI, you're more than free to do so. We have a bunch of samples for you to use. And we also have the corresponding Q client calls as well. So that's it. I mean, those two major services are like when you look at the nature of how a lot of these cloud companies began, and like, I mean, Amazon even, how they got started, like their first offerings, like S3 was one of the first. But when you look at some of the other competitors in the market, like Cloudflare, how they bootstrapped their like largest cloud customer like income source was actually through the use of an S3 compatible API in the form of what they call R2. And so this is like the super exciting bit that I have been building up towards for a long time. It ends up being a very simple demonstration because everything else is complexity that lies under the hood. The way that data is stored on QStorage uses a process called verifiable encryption. So in other words, if you don't have a public bucket where you don't have the key basically provided through the QStorage proxy, then this data is encrypted at rest and only accessible to those who hold the key material themselves. When you're using the browser interface, you are essentially creating a delegate key that allows you to do that through the browser, but at the same time, the encrypted data remains encrypted on the actual S3 API level. So if you're trying to use like the standard S3 APIs, you will hit an interesting issue if you're not using a QConsole created key to essentially dispatch all the proxying calls for you. Because otherwise you'll end up being able to, or not being able to decrypt the data that you're getting back. So that is something to keep in mind, but that's basically it at a high level. So we're very excited to open this up to more testers, and we look forward to seeing what cool things people create. I guess the last thing I want to mention is, while we're not showing it today, the way that templates essentially work is when you've created a bucket, like let's say that I've created a, what's a thing that won't be a spicy meatball in terms of things that I could say. Let's say that you create a virtual game system. Definitely not a console game system. Like, just a virtual game system that has a target architecture that is well known and people develop against it. And let's say that you have a template for running one of those virtualized game systems. If you create a bucket that contains that virtualizer and you have a target name for the file type of the executable game, you can publish that as a template so that other people can clone that bucket, drop in the exact file that is specified as the pluggable item, and then when they expose their own bucket, they're exposing a fully contained virtualizer of that game. And so that's like a simple, easy example that comes to mind, but there's also some further examples in terms of like what we're trying to do for the Farcaster community, for example, is like with the advent of Frames v2/mini apps, we're wanting to support the ability to make it very easy for you to convert a existing website into a frame. And so we have a template available that will let you essentially drop in your website as long as it has assumptions about like root path and stuff. And it will essentially wrap that and provide the relevant meta tags necessary to expose it as a frame. And we'll also like step you through the process of generating the signature needed to make it appear correctly in the mini apps section of the Farcaster app. And so yeah, that's it. I'll give a few moments for people who have questions. Next Sunday is going to be a really big one. We're going to be going through building out applications with QCL. Very excited to walk people through that process as well. I've already started to see some really cool examples coming up that people have been creating in terms of applications that can run directly on Q. So we're very excited to see how that pans out as well. Looking at the... Oh, okay. I don't know when this question was asked, so if I already answered it by accident, sorry. But I see that somebody said, will the Q Inc. website be migrated over to QConsole as part of the 2.1 rollout? Yes, yes. That is essentially like our entire like line of thinking. We are currently using GitHub Pages for hosting a lot of different web assets. We're also using Cloudflare's R2 to handle releases of our nodes themselves. And both of those things are either static file hosts that can go anywhere. So if it's an S3 compatible API, great. If it's not, doesn't matter as long as it's a flat file host, which we do. And then since R2 is S3 compatible to begin with, we'll just migrate everything over to that. So quite literally, when we launch with 2.1, we're going to be migrating all of Quilibrium's web assets, our documentation, the releases themselves entirely onto the network. So it will become self-hosting. So yeah, it's a bit of a kind of recursion thinking about it, but yeah, that is essentially one of the things we're going to do. We're also going to move Quorum onto this as well. One of the things that I think is really important to think about with the nature of how the web app for Quorum works is that right now the way we're hosting it today is a centralized place. Like the website itself is hosted on a centralized domain service. Like we have a singular DNS for accessing it. We have a singular file host for where that web app is hosted. While all of the stuff on the back end is itself decentralized because it's using the Q network, the front end stuff isn't. And so that is actually a potential vector of what could be attacked theoretically. So yeah, we also are moving Quorum to it. Basically anything that we're using current static file hosts, whether it's GitHub Pages or otherwise, we're just moving it all onto Q storage itself. And so, yeah, that's basically it. So looking forward to next Sunday, where we'll go through the process of building QCL-based applications. I think that that's going to be a very exciting time for folks. And then we'll also walk through like the schema defining steps so that you can understand how typed entities propagate through the network and can be related without having to reveal any data about it. But yeah, that's it. So thank you all for watching, and I'll stick around for a few more moments to see if there's any questions anybody has, and if not, we'll close it out early. I'll also say that I'm having serious issues with Streamlabs. It is constantly like flickering and shaking on me, so if I'm not seeing any questions from Twitch, and there have been questions from Twitch, I'm very sorry. I just literally am not seeing any of it. Oh yeah, I guess I should mention this real quick. There is somebody out there who I don't know if they're ready to be named about this, so I'm not going to name them. But I know that they were wanting to use the multi-account feature of basically the AWS style multi-account hierarchical feature. We do support that now on the QStorage API and the QKMS API. So just letting you know, I know that you were curious about that. We will support that. Uh, when can the public experience it? Yeah, so when we're doing the like broader rollout instead of the individually targeted access, you'll be able to access it at qconsole.quilibrium.com, and we'll link to it on the main Quilibrium website, and it'll basically just be accessible from there. We're going to be doing a lot of marketing rollout around this as well. If a journal is restricted in a country, will it be restricted if it migrated to Quill? I'm not sure what you mean by a journal. If there is a like publication of some kind that was restricted in a given country and it's hosted on Quilibrium itself, Quilibrium is basically the embodiment of this notion that the internet perceives censorship as damage and routes around it. So let freedom ring, baby. So if there's a host for it and you can route to the host, you can access the data on Quill. From a user experience perspective, will they notice a difference between website hosted on Q versus Git or another centralized service in terms of performance? So we actually put a lot of engineering work into the way that static hosting and like buckets exposed for public consumption works. So we have like several layers of tiered caching involved in the design of this so that it's actually very amenable to like high throughput requests. You essentially are going to be seeing like CDN level performance in terms of how fast the response times are. Yeah, political newspaper. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like there may be some countries which will have problems with certain political publications based on their own laws and interpretations. That's realistically like if somebody hosts it on Quilibrium, it's accessible. If a node does not wish to propagate it, and it is a public asset, which means that there is a known address associated with it, nodes can choose to not host it. But at the end of the day, if there is a node that's hosting it and you have a route to that node, you have access to that information regardless of whatever censor says you shouldn't. Cool. Really glad to see some of those spicier questions come in, though. I love seeing people ruminating over the ideas of what this enables. Awesome. Cool. Well, then I guess we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you on the next one this Sunday. All right. Bye, everybody.